The Sinister Six, a collection of Spider-Man's most deadly enemies, and a team with a much bigger roster than the name implies. Is there truly a supervillain team more iconic than Spider-Man's Sinister Six? Okay, yeah, maybe the Legion of Doom, but still. Way back in the very first Amazing Spider-Man annual, 6 of his deadliest foes so far, the Vulture, Electro, Sandman, Mysterio, Kraven the Hunter, and Dr. Octopus, teamed up to take down the Wallcrawler for good. He managed to beat them all, of course, but ever since then, tons and tons of variations of the Sinister Six have surfaced time and time again. Traditionally speaking, the team consists of the biggest names in Spider-Man's rogues gallery, but every now and then you find some surprising faces in the crowd. Let's begin with another very famous Spider-Man villain, Venom, the Eddie Brock version more specifically. He's not normally much of a team player, with the hatred and obsession that Eddie and the symbiote share for Spider-Man usually meaning that they prefer to go after him on their own. As a result, the circumstances that led to Venom joining the Sinister Six are kind of complicated. You see, the second time Dr. Octopus formed the Sinister Six in the famous Return of the Sinister Six storyline, he betrayed the whole team, having basically just gathered them to make his own plans for world domination a bit easier. Obviously, this left the whole team on bad terms with the not-so-good Doctor, and much later down the line, Sandman got the band back together to take revenge. Well, okay, 4 out of 6 of the old team. The original Kraven was dead at the time, meaning Sandman had to bring in his son. And of course, it was up to Spidey to begrudgingly save his old enemy from his own playmates. But this only makes 5, and we can't have a Spider-Man story with just 5 villains now, can we? Ahem. So, enter Venom. Seeing that everyone was ganging up on Spider-Man, he quickly joined the fray and declared that this unofficial Sinister Six was clearly short one member. It didn't go well. Not only did the group make fun of Venom's weaknesses, they basically lied about letting him kill Spider-Man and knocked him to the side when he protested about it. So, once the group's plan ultimately failed, Venom snuck right off to do his own thing once more, thus ending his very brief membership of the Sinister Six. The Prowler is not a character you associate with teamwork. Why would he be? Whether we're talking about Hobie Brown or Aaron Davis, the Prowler has always been a loner, be that as a cat burglar, an actual villain, or a momentary anti-hero. But nonetheless, Miles Morales' uncle Aaron Davis wasn't just a member of the Sinister Six at one point. He was the leader. He just wasn't calling himself the Prowler at the time. After the destruction of the Ultimate Universe, Aaron and Miles ended up becoming inhabitants of the mainline Marvel Universe instead, for reasons that I'm sure are completely unrelated to their overall popularity. Since he didn't have access to the Prowler costume, Aaron instead got his hands on Peter's old Iron Spider suit from back when he worked for Tony Stark during the superhero Civil War, giving it a slick new paint job, because you just can't be an edgy supervillain with no black on your outfit apparently. Aaron soon returned to a life of crime, and took on a dangerous assignment: to steal a decommissioned S.H.I.E.L.D. helicarrier and sell it to Lucia von Bardas, the Prime Minister of Latveria. Aaron's Sinister Six did have some of the usual suspects on its roster, in the form of good old Sandman and Hobgoblin, as well as the Francine Fry version of Electro, none of which we're going to count on this list, because the last 2 members are much more interesting. One of them was Bombshell, another Ultimate Universe survivor who was experimented on by the Roxxon Corporation while in jail for her crimes, giving her the good old powers of flight and energy blasting. And the last member was none other than the teleporting supervillain, The Spot, who often gets dismissed as one of Spidey's most harmless and goofy rogues. This is despite his incredible ability to create miniature black holes that he can travel through, which incidentally is a really good superpower to have for stealing things. While the team did get away with the helicarrier, Miles and the superhero group The Champions did manage to intercept the actual sale. Aaron fell off a cliff during the scuffle and nearly died, which made him swear off his life of crime afterwards. Well, for now anyway. I don't think I need to tell you that Spider-Man's rogue gallery is positively massive, or that it can be divided into several fractions. Mad scientists, thugs with superpowers, animal-themed villains, you name it, and there's a group for it somewhere. And one of these groups would be the various superpowered crime bosses that populate New York. Normally these guys wouldn't be Sinister Six material, considering they already have plenty to worry about with trying to win the turf wars. However, that doesn't mean they don't want to kill Spider-Man, and 2 villains in particular did eventually end up joining the Sinister 12. Yep, after having been publicly unmasked as the Green Goblin, Norman Osborn decided to bet the whole pot and bring together every supervillain he could. The result was a team of 12 baddies, among whom we find 2 crime bosses that have long been a thorn in Spidey's side: Hammerhead and Tombstone. Hammerhead, essentially a pastiche of Great Depression-era gangsters with pinstripe suits and everything, was originally a Russian Magyar hitman who got his skull caved in during a brawl right outside a theater, which was showing a movie about the notorious real-life gangster Al Capone. He was then found by the mad surgeon Jonas Harrow and had his whole skull replaced with impenetrable steel. Suffering from amnesia, he only remembered the Al Capone poster. And once he fully embraced all those good old 1920s gangster tropes, Hammerhead was born. Tombstone, on the other hand, was an African-American man by the name of Lonnie Lincoln, born with albinism, who felt it necessary to grow strong and powerful due to the bullying he endured from his peers for his condition. When the later Daily Bugle editor Joe Robertson wrote an expose on his activities for the school paper, it began a lifetime of animosity between the two, which naturally brought him into conflict with Peter on many occasions. The Spider-Man comics have been no stranger to high-concept events in the last decade. In the recent Sinister War arc in particular, a demonic new villain called Kindred began one of the largest scale attacks on Spider-Man seen to date. With several super baddie teams like the actual Sinister Six, the Superior Foes, and Vulture's own Savage Six already running around doing their own thing, Kindred manipulated events by using demonic centipedes to possess several villains, all in order to ensure that a total of 6 teams would collide. And of course, good old Spidey ended up in the middle trying desperately to survive. The strangest of these teams definitely arose when Kindred reanimated the deceased, obscure Spider-Man villain Sin Eater, who went around killing people who he believed had sinned. Using more of Kindred's parasitic centipedes, Sin Eater quickly gathered a team consisting of villains that normally aren't really related to Spider-Man, such as the Grey Gargoyle, who's usually an enemy of Thor, and Living Laser and Whirlwind, who tend to be more associated with Iron Man and Ant-Man. It's an odd collection to be sure, but there were 2 major powerhouses on the team. One of them was Kane Marko, the Juggernaut. While he's normally an X-Men villain, he has had some run-ins with Spider-Man in the past. In particular, the 2 squared off in the classic Spider-Man story Nothing Can Stop the Juggernaut, probably one of his most famous appearances. Oh, also, the 6th member was freaking Morlun! That is to say, the interdimensional vampire whose family eats Spider-Man across various dimensions, and one of the primary antagonists of the Spider-Verse comic book event. Holy crap, what a team! Have you ever heard the phrase, when the cat's away the mouse will play? Well, replace the mouse with a whole buttload of bees, and you have yourself a pretty apt description of that one time a whole Sinister Six team was led by one of Spider-Man's most bizarre and infamous villains, Swarm. And if you haven't heard of Swarm before, then oh boy do I have a story for you. Originally a German scientist studying the mating habits of killer bees, Fritz von Meyer ended up coming across a jungle-dwelling hive of bees that were mutated by a nearby meteorite. He attempted to learn to control the bees, but instead ended up getting killed by them. Somehow this caused his conscience to transfer to the actual bees, making them form a humanoid shape around his skeletal remains, effectively making him a psychic skeleton covered in bees. Yeah, how's that for a supervillain? Anyway, at a time when no other Sinister Six team was active and Peter was currently working as a guidance counselor at the Jean Grey School for Gifted Mutants despite not being a mutant himself, just roll with it, we'll be here all day if I explain, Swarm formed his own Sinister Six. And to say the least, this team was weird. They did have 3 other obscure Spider-Man villains, more specifically the Squid, the Melter, and Delilah. But rounding out the team, we had the Hulk villain Killer Shrike and the pool-obsessed 8-Ball, who's normally an enemy of Sleepwalker. This team lasted all of 4 pages, by the way. One can only hope that this embarrassing little experience taught them how to behave themselves in the future. Oh god, no, that's terrible even by my standards. I apologize. You all know Daredevil, and you all know his famous archenemy, the Kingpin. I mean, how could you not with a beloved TV show, a less beloved movie, and a famous comic book run in the 80s establishing them as one of the all-time greatest hero-villain pairings? But as some of you may know, there is another crime boss among Daredevil's enemies that was actually intended to be his original nemesis. This man is Leland Owlsley, although he personally prefers to go by his supervillain alias, the Owl. Capable of flight and going through many procedures to make himself stronger and more owl-like at the cost of his sanity, Leland is a violently unstable sort, despite putting on airs of being a distinguished man of taste. I mean, come on, the dude eats rats just to look more like an owl, for God's sake. When Boomerang Sinister Six, and we'll get to those guys later, tried to steal a valuable painting of an unmasked Dr. Doom from Owl's collection, it instead ended up in the hands of longtime Spider-Man villain the Chameleon. But this is a story about supervillains constantly double-crossing each other and making weird deals. So the Owl simply hired Boomerang's team to steal it right back, providing them with a much bigger crew to storm Chameleon's hideout. He didn't join the actual fight, of course, but he did finance the whole operation, making him the 16's de facto leader. And honestly, I could probably make a whole other video talking about the guys on this team, but let's save those for another time. Gog is definitely one of the strangest of Spider-Man's many villains to have ever been in the Sinister Six. In fact, he really isn't even that much of a villain. The alien that we know as Gog is a Tsiln, born on the planet Broi in the Willis system of the Milky Way galaxy, and was a pet of a Hayslip prince. And before you dingbats decide to make fun of my accent again, you try pronouncing all those nonsense names. Through no fault of his own, a civil war on his planet resulted in the poor little guy ending up on Earth, where he was found by Kraven the Hunter in the Savage Land. Kraven soon noticed that Gog very quickly grew massive in size, and when Peter, J. Jonah Jameson, and Gwen Stacy came to the Savage Lands to investigate rumors of a monster, he commanded Gog to kidnap Gwen. But thankfully, Spider-Man and the local hero Ka-Zar managed to defeat Gog after he fell into some quicksand. Gog then went on to get used by more villains to do their dirty work. First there was Ka-Zar's brother the Plunderer, who rescued him from the quicksand and used him to commit crimes. But much later, Dr. Octopus managed to snatch the creature for himself and made him a member of his current Sinister Six. It took a whole boatload of superheroes to take down the now absolutely colossal Gog, but he was eventually shrunk down by Mr. Fantastic and sent home to his own world. But eventually Gog came back to Earth, and he was then kept as a pet by Boomerang and his new roommate, a certain fella you might have heard of named Peter Parker. Yeah, that was a weird time. In a pretty random moment during the comic book Civil War, a new Sinister Six once again turned up to wreak havoc. Among classic members like Dr. Octopus, the Shocker, Vulture, and the Lizard, who is also kind of an unusual choice, the last two members we hear about stand out like a sore thumb. One of them is the scythe-handed Eric Williams, brother of Simon Williams, the Wonder Man. As the black sheep of his family, Eric spent most of his childhood watching his brother Simon get treated way better than he did, and he grew more and more bitter as a result. When Simon later became Wonder Man and seemingly died after fighting the Avengers, Eric had the Tinkerer make his scythe arm for him. He then had it enhanced with the ability to put people in a coma and became the Grim Reaper, facing the Avengers many times over the years. The last weird member of this team is the Trapster, and though some may be familiar with him from various run-ins with Spider-Man in both comic books and cartoons, he's usually more closely associated with the Fantastic Four. In fact, this criminal, who uses a super sticky adhesive that he fires from a powerful glue gun, is normally depicted as a member of the evil Fantastic Four counterpart group known as the Frightful Four. What the heck these two were even doing joining the Sinister Six in the first place is anyone's guess, but it's not like the team lasted that long. They were quickly beaten off panel by Captain America and the Secret Avengers. Remember that Boomerang-led Sinister Six that I mentioned earlier? Yeah, let's look back at those guys for a moment. If you haven't read Superior Foes of Spider-Man, you really should. It's a hilarious and fantastic book all about second-rate supervillains constantly double-crossing each other. I mean, what more could you want? In this series, the ever-opportunistic Boomerang took the chance to establish his own Sinister Six, consisting of a string of lesser-known Spider-Man villains. Shocker wasn't too surprising and is the most well-known of the bunch, and the rest, that is, Speed Demon, Lady Beetle, and Overdrive, had either tangled with Spidey before, taken over the identity of an old Spidey foe, or recently been introduced to the Rogues Gallery, so those guys don't really demand much attention from us either on this list. The Living Brain, however, does, considering this was only his fourth appearance, despite having been created in 1963. When first introduced, this obscure foe was a robot created by a Dr. Petty, who touted that it could solve any problem and answer anything, which a pair of crooks thought would help them make a fortune on gambling. During a scuffle when they tried to steal it, the brain then malfunctioned and went on a rampage, only to be taken down by Spider-Man. He then resurfaced in 1988, a whole 25 years later, this time controlled by Dr. Petty's son. And then he popped up 12 years later controlled by a pair of robbers. And then, out of nowhere, here he was in 2013 as part of Boomerang's Sinister Six. If I know Boomerang correctly, he probably just stole him from some warehouse during a completely different heist. The Living Brain didn't last very long on the team, however. Dr. Octopus, who had taken over Peter's body at the time, took it for himself and used it as a robot butler in his mad scientist activities. This left Boomerang's crew one member short for the rest of their book's run, despite the fact that they were still using the Sinister Six name. I mean, you gotta hold on to the brand name, you know? Besides, they could get a sixth member at any moment, like maybe Dormammu? Yeah, no, keep dreaming, Fred. And finally, here's a couple baddies that I'm pretty sure you never imagined would find their way to the Sinister Six. Going back to Spider-Man's little side gig as a student counselor for a team of young potential X-Men, the whole team once found themselves brought to a strange place known as Mojo World. In this world, the titular ruler Mojo keeps the population, which consists of beings known as the Spineless Ones, enslaved by constantly feeding them mass-produced multimedia entertainment. After abducting Spider-Man and the kids with some help from the Chameleon, this gross-looking bastard then forced a lot of them to fight a truly massive crowd of Spider-Man villains known as the Sinister 66, all for the Spineless One's entertainment. And from what we see of this group, we can spot two especially surprising members. One of them is Morbius the Living Vampire, who has been an ally of Spidey's as much as he has been an enemy, considering he's just trying to find a cure for his unique brand of vampirism. The other one is Miles Warren, known better as the Jackal, the villain that was the mastermind behind the entirety of the infamous Spider-Man clone saga. Both of these characters are usually way too wrapped up in their own thing to bother with stuff like the Sinister Six, so how come they're here? Well, that's because, in a ploy that would have made Mysterio proud, every single one of the Sinister 66 were holograms. That's right, in true Mojoverse fashion, it was all special effects. But I had you going there for a moment, didn't I? And there you go, that makes 25. And if you count more of those holograms, the rest of the Owls team, and that one time Spidey played Sinister 60 with a kid, there's way more where those came from. Huh, now I want to put together my own weird and random Sinister 6 team. Who should be on it?